Hi, I'm Ruth Nyberg, Education Coordinator for the White Sewing Machine Company. Today I'm here to work you through your new White 9800 top-of-the-line computerized sewing machine. We at the White Sewing Machine Company are committed to helping you learn your machine to the fullest. Before we begin actual sewing, let's work through some of the wonderful features on your new White 9800. One of the new exciting features is your new fabric guide. Your fabric guide is like a brain within your machine because all you need to do is tell it the weight of fabric you're working on, and it automatically knows where to set the appropriate stitch length, width, even what presser foot and size needle you should use. Isn't that a wonderful feature? To work with our fabric guide, we have our new help window. And our help window is what brings all the things that the brain tells you right out. For example, your help window will tell you what speed you're sewing at. To adjust this speed, all you need to do is touch the speed button. And you can see the speed changes automatically. Moving over from the speed control, we have the needle. It'll always tell you what size needle you should use that's appropriate with your weight of fabric. For example, if I'm on a medium weight stretch, you'll now notice in my help window, it's recommending that I use a stretch needle. For each stitch we select, our new machine always knows what stitch length to use, as well as stitch width. So no longer do you need to worry about where to set the dials. But remember, at any time, you can always override and make the stitch exactly the way you'd like it. In between the stitch length and the stitch width, we have our presser foot. It'll actually tell you what presser foot you should use. For example, for a straight stitch on a medium weight woven, it's recommending we use our A foot. The little number above the presser foot indicates the amount of pressure that the foot places on the fabric. For this stretch fabric, it's recommending a pressure of 2. Our pressure control dial is located on the left-hand side of our machine. The numbers will actually turn from about 0 in a darn position up to 9, so you can vary it for all fabric weights. For stretch fabrics, we would adjust it to 2. As we move along in our help window, we come across a nice little box that actually works as our function. Right now we're sewing in the normal mode, and that just means continuous stitching. By touching the function button, it tells us program and also repeat. We'll cover this a little bit later. Next to the function square, we have the menu, and this indicates to us what menu we're sewing in. Right now we're just in our sewing mode, but with one touch, we're in the block lettering mode and now in the cursive mode. Because your new computerized white has 2 styles of writing, so you can make great monogram embellishments on towels, on garments. You can even label your children's clothing when you send them off to camp. With one touch, we're back to normal sewing. At certain times, you're going to feel the need to mirror image your stitch. And what that does is actually flip it from side to side. And with one touch, you can see in your help window a nice, kind of like a little diamond that's shaded in will appear. And this indicates that it's mirroring your stitch from side to side. Besides having the wonderful fabric guide and help window, our White 9800 has some other wonderful features. For example, it's made of a one-piece all aluminum casting. By making our casting out of one piece, it makes it extra strong and durable so it can withstand a lot of wear and tear without putting any undue stress on any of the parts inside. By making it aluminum, it also makes it very lightweight and portable, because after all, we know you're going to want to take it to many sewing classes. To thread our 9800, it's just a one It's kind of like a one moving action. We're going to go through that again in just a moment. But along with that one feeding action for threading, we never have to unthread to wind a bobbin, and it stops when it's full. To help us in our sewing when we get into the maintenance aspect, the thing you're going to love the very best is the fact that you never have to oil your white. That's right, it's self-oiling. Your only maintenance is going to be keeping lint out of the bobbin case area. And while we're down by this bobbin case area, another exciting area to point out is the fact that we're jam-proof. So never do you have to worry about all that jamming with your fabric. Your white 9800 is a free-floating shuttle system, and it'll push those other threads up and out of the way and allow you to continue sewing. Isn't that just wonderful? Let's move on and actually talk a little bit more about this help window so we can get going sewing. Underneath our help window, we have a selection panel. This selection panel is actually how you achieve things. As we start from the far left, you'll notice that we have a reverse button. By just touching the reverse, that'll give us instant reverse. If you touch it both twice fast, you'll notice that you have a reverse arrow appearing in your help window. We are now sewing continuously in reverse. When doing darning and other special techniques, this comes in especially helpful. With one touch, we're now back to regular sewing. On that same button, you'll also notice that we see a symbol of a buttonhole. We use this when making a buttonhole, and it's one touch. Moving over from the reverse and buttonhole button, we see the stop. The stop serves as a one-time pattern end. So if you only want to sew something once, you touch stop. It also serves as a finishing stitch. So when you're coming to the end of your fabric, all you need to do is touch stop, and you can see the stop will be illuminated in your help window. The adjustable stitch length and stitch width are there for your convenience because, like I mentioned before, at any time you can change them as necessary. If we wanted to make our stitch closer together, we would just subtract it down. If we would like to make it longer, we just touch the plus. Isn't that easy? The stitch length button works exactly the same as the stitch width. Again, to make the stitch closer together, giving you a more satin-like finish, you would just minus. To make it wider apart, as used in some overcasting instances, you would just touch plus. We went through the function button once before, but let's review it again because it's a very important part. In the normal mode, we're doing just continuous straight sewing. By making one touch, we've now entered the program mode. This is what enables you to program over 32 stitches together at one time, giving you many decorative options. But to actually sew this series, you need to touch the function button one more time to place it in repeat. And now your white 9800 is ready to sew. The menu mode works with the stitch panel. All the blue stitches are the regular stitches. So when you see the straight stitch in the menu box, that means we're working with all the blue stitches. With one touch on the menu, you will now see a block capital A. That indicates we are now working with our blocked alphabet. With again one touch, we are now working with our script alphabet, and that gives you your cursive letters. And the mirror image, that one touch, and it'll automatically flip your image from side to side. We went through the help window once already, but I want to bring out a couple other details that weren't shown or illuminated when we first began. And let's go back up to that needle. Up at the top, we went through the speed, where we could vary it with one touch. The needle up or down. At this time, we're sewing in the up position. One touch gives us the down position. The twin needle sewing eliminates a twin needle. For one moment, I'm going to touch stitch 4, and that's a zigzag. You notice that our zigzag has selected a stitch width of 3. If I tried to make it longer, it won't let me, and you notice the twin needle is flashing. My help window is saying, "Ruth, you have a twin needle in. If you try to go wider, you might break it." So make sure that you always touch the twin needle safety when working with a twin needle. For this particular stitch, another thing also appeared in our help window out of nowhere. And what that little symbol is a stabilizer. And it's recommending that on a medium weight stretch, we use a stabilizer. That stabilizer will help eliminate any puckering or pulling. Another feature is when I touch, for example, buttonhole and lightweight stretch. Did I get my buttonhole? There we go. Excuse me for a moment while I get that touch. You know what? What I'm doing is a very common mistake that could happen to you at home. Nothing seemed to appear in my screen saying stitch 33, which I needed. So I immediately looked to my menu mode. And if you notice, I'm in the script writing. My help window can only help me as far as I can help it. So let's touch normal sewing, and now you can see that stitch 33 is a buttonhole. Let's touch medium weight stretch, and it's now indicating that we cord this buttonhole to get the best possible finish. Isn't it wonderful that our help window can help us make sure that everything turns out perfect? Let's continue on through this section and actually get ready to sew. But what I'd like to talk about before we start sewing is needles. Your new white computer works with the Schmetz needles, and they are quality European needles. And let me just locate that for you. And these are your Schmetz needles. Your 9800 will come equipped with a size 80 needle in it. At certain times, your help window is going to ask you to use, let's say, a size 90 stretch or maybe a 70. For this exercise, we're going to use the 80-12, but we recommend that on all garment sewing, you use what your help window recommends. When it comes time to choose the thread to accompany your garments, you will normally choose a lighter weight thread for lighter weight garments. When picking threads, make sure that your thread gives you a nice, even, let me see if I can get this right. You'll notice on my spool that I have no burrs to this thread. It's nice and smooth. If you notice a lot of fraying and burring coming out from your spool of thread, I'd recommend that you choose a different spool because that fraying is going to show in your garment. Always choose a quality thread. Your poly-cotton blends seem to work the very best. Let's begin by threading our white 9800. We've equipped this with 2 spool pins for your convenience. On the top of our machine, you'll notice that we have a vertical spool pin. I generally use this when I'm doing twin needle sewing. On the back side of our white 9800, we have a horizontal thread delivery. And let me just unthread the machine as it's threaded at this time. And we'll begin from the very beginning. This thread delivery on the back can vary for the different styles of spools of thread. Whether you're working the long vertical tubular or the traditional wider size, it doesn't matter because you'll get wonderful thread delivery. You will notice that you do get 2 little spool caps with it. When working with the large spools, I will normally store the little spool on the spindle first. I then place my large spool on and place the large spool cap on the back to ensure great thread delivery. Let's begin by threading. I'm going to take the large spool holder and place it on my spool pin with the flat side facing out. Since we're working with a tubular spool, we'll then place that on the spool pin next and take our final spool holder and place it on next to it. Be sure that you get the flat side of the spool next, or the spool holder next to the spool. To begin threading, We'll then take our thread and come to our first thread guide. This first thread guide is a pre-tension, and that's going to actually help eliminate any little squiggles in our thread. To thread that through there, you're actually pulling it in between the metal and the white guide. As you can see, it's a very smooth process. We then move on to our tension disc. You'll notice that there are two sides to your tension disc. It does not matter which side you thread it through, but be sure to get it through one of them. We then come under the check spring and up to our take-up lever. Our take-up lever was slotted, so you could see the thread easily went right through there. We then come down to the guide before the needle, and to help thread our needle, I'm going to lower my presser foot. You'll notice the back of the foot is white, and that'll make it easy to see, as well as our dual light capability. Our needles thread from front to back, so let's just clean that little burr off the edge and thread it through our needle. Wasn't that a snap? Before we can continue sewing, we're going to need to wind a bobbin. I'm going to open up my accessory tray, and you'll notice I have great bobbin storage. I'm now going to take out an empty bobbin. Your bobbins for your computerized white have two sides to them. One side is flat, and the other side is concave. When winding a bobbin, you'll need to place the concave side in on your bobbin winder. The bobbin winder on your computerized white is located on the side. Just place the bobbin on and push it all the way. Then, because there's no need to unthread our needle to wind a bobbin, I just make sure the thread is underneath the foot. I take it over under the nameplate and wrap it on our bobbin about 3 or 4 times. With the excess thread, I just clip that on my thread cutter and begin to wind. Isn't it wonderful? While my bobbin is winding, what I'm going to do is remove my bobbin case so I can be ready to sew. To remove my bobbin case, I just actually push in and take it right out. By tipping it over, the bobbin easily comes out. Since I'm not using that one, let's place it in our bobbin storage. My bobbin automatically stopped when it was full, so I will now clip that thread on the thread cutter. To place the bobbin in the bobbin case, make sure the concave side is going in. By the way, you can only put your bobbin in one way. Now we'll need to pull that bobbin thread, let's grab a hold of that thread, there we go, through the first slot. From the slot, it pulls up into the spring, and that's how we have bobbin tension. Before we place the bobbin into the machine, make sure that your thread is laying off to the right, so you'll notice it's behind the stitch finger. When we place our bobbin case into our white, make sure that stitch finger is pointed up. To lock it in, we just push, and it'll click in place. If you want, you can wiggle it a little bit to ensure you're ready to sew. Let's clip that thread on our convenient thread cutter, close the bobbin door up, our accessory tray, and now we're ready to sew. What I'm going to be working with today is an optional accessory that's available for you to purchase from your white dealer, and it's called our Owner's Workbook. It's a companion to this video, and they work wonderful. So let's turn to page 33 and begin sewing with a basic straight stitch. I'm working with a lightweight woven, so I need to tell my fabric guide I'm on light woven. I then touch stitch 1. You'll notice that in my help window, it's recommending I use my A presser foot. As I look, I can see the A foot is on. The other recommendation is for a size 70 needle. Again, if I was sewing a garment, I would use a size 70, but we're going to use our 80-12. You'll notice the throat plate on your white is a non-glare, and it's actually marked in metric. But there's no need for you to learn metric because the 1 is equivalent to 3/8, The 1.5 is equal to 5/8. The 2 is equal to 3/4, etc., etc. So let's begin sewing. For easy back tacking, it's just one touch of the reverse. When I come down to the end, I'm going to touch stop to tie it off and end it. What a beautiful seam. But, you know what? As I turn this over to the back side, you notice where my stitch isn't quite perfect? Earlier, when we were talking about tension, I had reduced my tension, and that's why I'm not getting a perfect stitch. So let's run this one more time, but I'm going to make sure it's in its normal section of 5.5. Whenever you do a special technique, always remember to bring your tension back to normal. So again, using the other side of our fabric, let's run this again. Since my stop was still illuminated, it tied it off for me. Let's touch stop so we can continue sewing. I'm going to touch stop again for that automatic tie-off. Isn't it wonderful? Our thread cutter is located right on the side, and what a snap. Do you notice the difference in our stitch? What wonderful qualities. Let's continue now onto a lightweight stretch fabric. So I need to tell my fabric guide I'm working on light stretch. For light stretch, to achieve the best stitch, we should actually use a little tiny zigzag. And they knew that at White, so they've given you stitch 3, which is a little tiny zigzag, and it's perfect for when working on swimwear and lingerie. As we consult our help window, again it recommends the A foot, but it also recommends that we reduce our pressure to 4. Our adjustable presser foot pressure is located on the left side, and let's just turn that to 4. Now we'll place our fabric under our foot and run this seam. If you'd like to go a little faster, you can just touch your speed button. First you have slow, medium, and full. Of course, you'd probably guide your fabric a little better if you were running a seam. But notice how that little zigzag gives us all the give we need. Moving on from our basic seam, that's what we do when we want to press our garments open. You'd notice that we would have raw edges on it. So to eliminate those raw edges, we'd need to overcast. So let's select our overcast. I'm working with a piece of medium weight woven, so touch medium woven. I'm then going to work with stitch 5, so we just touch stitch 5. As I consult my help window, again it recommends the A foot, but our pressure back to 6. To help turn the pressure easier, it's easy to lower the presser foot, and then it turns ever so nicely. We will place the raw edge of our fabric even with the edge of our A foot and run our overcast. Isn't that a beautiful overcast? No need to worry about your edges fraying away. In the concept of basic techniques, there are times when we want to do time savers. Instead of doing the traditional seam and overcast, why not combine them into one step? So let's begin by selecting a lightweight stretch on our fabric guide and stitch 9. Stitch 9 is a built-in seam and overcast. Let's consult our help window. You'll notice for this seam overcast, it recommends that we use the J foot with a pressure at 4. So let's change our foot. Let's open the accessory tray and locate the J foot. The J foot has a little letter J on it, as well as a stitch pin. To take our A foot off, we need to just push down and forward, and it slides right off. To now place the J foot on, we're going to be locating the little spring on the ankle with the little pin on the J foot, and it will slide right in place. So we line it up, we push down and forward. Let's now adjust our pressure to 4. It's much easier if you lower that foot and now turn to 4. With our threads behind, we're now ready to sew. A seam overcast stitch is great for seaming on like lingerie or swimwear when you don't want the bulk of just a straight stitch. And your J-foot is great because that stitch pin is actually going to keep your fabric nice and flat. Whether you're sewing directly on the edge or in just slightly. Besides working on lightweight stretch fabrics, let's try a heavyweight stretch. Once I've touched for heavyweight stretch, I'm now going to use stitch 10. Once I've touched stitch 10, let's consult the help window. We can now see that it's recommending we change our foot to B. So let's change to B. We've located our B foot, and now again, it's down and forward. Let's put that away so we don't lose it, and place the B foot on. We line it up. Let's get that lined up on that stitch pin, and on. Wasn't that easy? As I consult my help window even more, it's recommending a pressure of 2. So let's change our pressure to 2. Make sure that everything is in our accessory tray nice and easy so we continue sewing. By stitching right on the edge, you're getting a wonderful overcast and it's finishing it right for you. With all that stretch and finish. Isn't it great? Besides working on stretch fabrics, because I know not all of you do, let's try a seam overcast on woven. And I'm going to work with the denim, so let's touch heavyweight woven and use stitch 12. Stitch 12 is a stitch that's got a lot of like rick-rack edge to it, so it's going to finish it, actually more like a cross stitch, and give us a great finish. But before we can sew, it's important that we consult the help window. We have the B foot on, but now it's recommending our pressure is at 6. So again, lower the foot and resume your pressure back to 6. We're now ready to sew. By having this like cross-stitch finish on our denim fabrics, you're going to see that it's going to give it a wonderful finish, especially for something like this that likes to ravel an awful lot when it gets a lot of wear and tear. And notice its finish, and we have great strength with our seam. Besides using a utility stitch like overcasting, there are a lot of us who do some tailoring techniques, and we often have to baste. With my 9800, it's very easy. Let's go to our fabric guide and touch medium weight woven. Basting is just a technique where we use a straight stitch, so let's touch 1. When we baste, we generally want our straight stitch to be longer, so it makes it very easy to remove. So let's just lengthen up the stitch length. I'm going all the way up to the longest length possible, which is 6 millimeters. Boy, is that long. Again, to make it easy to tear out, or actually to remove, you're not really tearing, you'd like to reduce your needle tension. So let's take that tension somewhere down between 3 and 2. We'll place our fabric underneath where we have it lined up and run our row of basting. You may notice on some fabrics that it'll want to start to gather it up a little bit. Don't worry, because you can always ease it flat. But after all, basting is a temporary stitch, so when we get everything lined up, we want to be able to remove it. And watch how easy that is to remove. It just easily slides right out. Isn't it great? Let's run one more row of basting just to save for our own sample. You can definitely see the length in that straight stitch. Besides basting, let's move on to another technique that comes in very handy, and that's hemming. Now, the hemming technique we're going to work with today is a blind hem. So let's go to our fabric guide and touch medium weight stretch. And now stitch 6. Once I've touched stitch 6, let's consult the help window. On my help window, we can see it's recommending I change to foot number D, actually foot letter D, which is our blind hem foot. So again, let's open our accessory tray and locate the D foot. It's down and forward and up and on. It's also recommending that we change our pressure to 2. So let's go over to the side and adjust that pressure to 2. For successful blind hemming, it's all in the fold. Right now I have the right side of my fabric up. Let's say it's for our skirt. And I'm just going to turn it inside out. I folded my hem up approximately 2 inches. At this point, I might give it a light press with my iron and then come in and pin it. I'm going to begin pinning in approximately 1/4 of an inch from the edge. So there's one pin, and our second pin is in place. So you can see it's in about that 1/4 inch from the edge. As we take it over to the machine, we are then going to fold it under approximately, actually I shouldn't say you're folding it under. You're actually folding your fabric back. So can you see where it's got this nice little like S fold to it? We then just place it underneath the presser foot and begin stitching. It's making a little zigzag and coming right up and catching it. When you reach your pin, be sure to pull it out because it's best not to sew over pins. Again, let's take that second pin out and continue sewing. It's caught on the underside, so it's caught our hem, and thus giving us perfect results. I bet you didn't think it could be so very easy. Moving on from hemming, another technique that we like to use an awful lot that is so very wonderful on our white 9800 is buttonholes. And what makes buttonholes so very easy is our special C foot. But first, let's tell our machine that we're working with a medium weight woven fabric and we want to make a buttonhole. So let's touch stitch 33. Once I've touched 33, we can see now as we go to the help window that it's recommending that we use the presser foot C and a pressure of 6. So let's check that pressure on the side. And I can see that it's on 2, so let's bring it right back to 6. And now let's change to the C foot. But before I change to that C foot, let me tell you a little bit about it. As you can see when you take a look at the C foot, we've got one toe that's a little bit shorter than the other one. That helps us when starting our buttonholes to make sure that we get them lined up and placed exactly the same. The longer toe has got 4 lines marking on it. Those lines indicate the size of our buttonholes so we can make them all exactly the same. We're working with approximately a 3/8 inch, a 5/8 inch, a 1/2 inch, and etc. So let's change to that buttonhole foot. We're pushing down and forward and it slides off. So let's put the D foot away and now slide the C foot in place. It's just down and on. You will notice that when you do buttonholes, it's important that we have a reduced tension, and we've changed that now to approximately 3:2, and that will ensure the best possible buttonholes on all fabric weights. So let's make our first buttonhole. Normally you would have your facing on your garment interfaced. Since mine isn't, I'm going to use a stabilizer. It's important that you always do your practice buttonhole on the same scrap that's interfaced as your garment. Now I want all my buttonholes to start in the same place, so you'll notice that I'm lining up the edge of the fabric even with the short toe on the C foot. Now let's take a button, just to use for an example, to see what size we need to make this buttonhole. And with one tap of my foot control, you'll notice my needle has gone down into the fabric. I'm going to place my button right next to the needle. I can see this is basically coming out to the last line on the C foot. So that determines the size of our buttonhole. So let's take that button away and begin making our buttonhole. When we begin stitching, you'll notice it's stitching back up the left-hand side. When our stitching reaches the bottom edge of the C foot, all I will do is touch the buttonhole symbol. So let's touch buttonhole. That causes us to do a 3-step bar tack and begin stitching back down the right. When we reach the bottom, we're going to go back up and touch the buttonhole symbol again. It does another 3-step bar tack and automatically ties it off. Did you ever think it could be so easy? And look at this buttonhole. It's beautiful. I know this buttonhole is the right size for my button, so let's say we want to make a continuum, like I have 5 buttons on my garment. To make sure that every one is the exact same size, all I need to do is touch stop. So let's touch stop. And now, every single buttonhole will again be the exact same size. Isn't that memory feature wonderful? It's going to come up. When it reaches its length, it'll bar tack and come back down the right-hand side. When it reaches the bottom, it'll again bar tack and tie it right off. Isn't that great? Besides having a traditional bar tack style buttonhole where we have 2 square ends, we also have 4 additional buttonhole styles on our white 9800. Those styles are a rounded buttonhole. This rounded edge end buttonhole is actually great for when working on lightweight fabrics such as children's clothing and very delicate things. Next to our rounded buttonhole, we have our reinforced stretch buttonhole. Again, great for when working on stretch fabrics, work clothes, and things that are going to need that little extra wear and tear because they're going to have a lot of utility. One of my favorite buttonholes is the new heirloom buttonhole, and this is what gives you that hand-finished look. On so many garments where we're looking at suits and we want it to be soft and delicate, you can see what a beautiful finish it gives. And for all of you tailorers out there, we haven't forgotten you. We've also made a true keyhole buttonhole, giving you a nice eyelet finish on the end for all your coats and blazers. Now, buttonholes were very easy, weren't they? I know that final thing for a long time I never thought could be possible with the sewing machine was sewing on buttons. And boy, is it easy. Let's go over and select the button stitch. So I've just touched stitch 38. We're still working on a medium weight woven, so now let's consult our help window. We'll notice that it now recommends no presser foot, so we're not going to use any foot at all. But since we are back to a regular stitch function, let's return our tension back to normal. And that normal setting is approximately 5.5. Now let's remove the foot and sew on a button. It's just down and forward. Before we can sew buttons on, you'll notice right now that the feed teeth are in the up position. That's what feeds the fabric right along. When we sew buttons on, we want it to stay in one place. So located over next to our on-off switch is our drop feed button, and all we need to do is push it down and it drops the feed. We're now ready to sew on a button. We just set the button underneath the foot, line the ankle up with the holes, and in this case I'm working with a buttonhole that has 4 holes on it. If you'd like, you can take your first stitch by hand, just ensuring that everything is lined up perfectly, and of course it is. I'm now going to stitch approximately 10 times. Once I've reached that point, I'm going to go up and touch the reverse button. That will automatically tie it off, giving us that 4-step knot. In the case that this is a 4-hole buttonhole, I'd need to fill in the other side. And I'd like the same amount of thread on both sides. So let's go up to our stitch panel and just touch stop. Our 9800 automatically remembers how many stitches we take. We now just move the fabric down, realign it up, and again I'm just going to take that little hand stitch to make sure everything is cleared and resume stitching. And again, watch, it automatically knots it. Let's just trim those threads up. And you notice, because it knots it automatically, I can trim my threads nice and close and never ever have to worry about my buttons coming undone. In some cases, you may find that when working with big buttons, for example, like coat buttons, you might want to have that shank in the middle. And that's why your white 9800 is equipped with a button reed. To use your button reed, you would actually just take your thick coat button, place it on top, underneath the foot, and resume stitching. This space in between here is going to give you that little shank you need for that wear and tear on coats. Weren't buttons easy? Let's move on from our buttons now into a few some practical applications that we want to use with our stitches. But before we can do any stitching, we need to go back and do a couple things. Let's first raise our feed teeth. To raise the feed teeth, we just push down, and the first stitch we take, they will automatically come back up. The first practical application I'd like to sew you through is a technique we called stitch in the ditch. And stitch in the ditch is really great because when working on, let's say, skirts, when you're putting in that waistband, you want to be able to run it right down so you're stitching it down and leaving almost an invisible row of stitching. And that'll automatically take our facing down. For stitch in the ditch, we're going to use a regular straight stitch, so let's touch medium weight stretch on our fabric guide, and now stitch 1. Stitch 1 is our straight stitch, and if we consult our help window, it's recommending that we use the A presser foot. So let's put on an A presser foot. Isn't it great the way our accessory tray holds all of our feet nice and convenient? Again, it's just up and on. The help window also recommends that our adjustable presser foot pressure is placed on 2. So let's change that pressure to 2. What we want to do first is we want to make a mock waistband. So what I've done is we have our fabric and our waistband. I'm going to stitch them on at a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Make sure that your thread tail is evenly feeding behind, and that'll eliminate any of that little pulling on the fabric that you just saw. Now that we have our 5/8 inch seam in, we're going to fold the waistband up and over. So can you see where we formed that waistband effect? To use the stitch in a ditch effectively, even though our help window is going to recommend the A foot, we're going to change to the C foot. And I know that sounds a little silly because the C foot is for buttonholes, but that long toe on the one side works great as a wonderful guide. Besides using the C-foot, what I'd like to also mention is one of our optional accessories. Now again, this is something you can purchase from your local white dealer. We refer to this foot as our edge joining foot, and you can see it's got a nice pin coming down through the center that works great when stitching in the ditch. Let's continue this with our C-foot. So we now just place this underneath the foot, and I'll notice when I line that up with the stitch pin, then our needle's in the center, and that would stitch right through our waistband. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to adjust the needle position. And in just one moment, I'll go through that a little bit more thoroughly. But let's go up to the stitch width, and we're going to plus that all the way to 5 millimeters. You'll notice that it's now moved our needle over to a left-hand needle position, enabling us to have a great stitch in the ditch. Our waistband is stitched on and seamed down. In that stitching in the ditch technique, I worked with moving my needle position, and I'd like to tell you a little bit more about that. When I was making my ultra leather skirt, I never thought that being able to have an adjustable needle pressure, or excuse me, let me get this right for you, that being able to move my needle positions could be so helpful. But you'll notice I wanted to get the needle in just the right position for my top stitching. And your white 9800 is equipped with 25 different needle positions. That's right, that means you can get the needle exactly where you want to. To move that needle back and forth, we're going to work with the stitch width. Now normally, the stitch width determines how wide a stitch is. But since we're working with a straight stitch, there's no width to it. So that adjustable stitch width moves our needle to the different positions. We've moved it 10 stitches already to the left because it's at 5.0. If we touch the plus 2 more times, we can move it all the way over to a full 6 millimeter on the left. To give us a right hand needle position, all we need to do is go up to our selection panel and touch our mirror image. Once I touch the mirror image button, you will notice that our needle automatically swung to the far right hand side. To bring it back to center needle position, let's go back up to the stitch panel, to the stitch width, and just minus that to 0. And you can see that the needle is moving each step along the way. And now we're back at center needle position. One of the things you can do with a traditional straight stitch is something that comes in very handy, and it's called speed gathering over bobbin threads. This helps eliminate broken threads when pulling it up and easing it. So let's tell our fabric guide that we're working on a lightweight woven and that we want to do a seam. It's recommending that we use our A presser foot and a pressure of 6. So let's change to our A foot. It's down, off, and back to A. Let's double check our pressure to make sure it's on 6, and we do need to turn that back to normal. For speed gathering, place your fabric underneath the foot. With one tap of the foot, control, your needle will go down, and a tap again will bring the needle back up. The reason I did this is I want to be able to pull my bobbin thread all the way through to the top. So do you see where I was able to bring that bobbin thread up? I'm now going to pull out approximately 12 inches. And actually for speed gathering, the stitch that works the very best is a zigzag. So let's go back over to our stitch panel and touch stitch 4. Everything in our help window resumes the same, so let's speed gather. When speed gathering, be careful not to stitch on your threads, and if you like, you can actually begin pulling while you're stitching to do your gathering for you. And look at that, we've automatically gathered it, and our gathers are adjustable. The next technique that comes in really handy is when we think about mending. Now, I know for myself, mending at one time was not a super fun application, but my white 9800 makes it so easy. Right now, we're going to work with a piece of medium weight woven, so let's touch medium woven. What I'd like to simulate for you is like a crotch seam in a pair of pants, that one that seems like it always wants to bust out. So let's use a reinforced straight stitch to make this extra strong. So going up to our stitch panel, let's select stitch 2. When referring to our help window, we can see that it recommends our A foot and our pressure on 6. So we're ready to sew. Now, I'm stitching across the bias for you because that's actually what a crotch seam would be like. And you can notice that this reinforced straight stitch is taking 2 stitches forward, 1 back, 2 forward, 1 back, and giving us an extra strong seam. It even gives us give, so we can give with those trousers. Isn't it great? Let's move on from mending to darning, another practical utility application. And for darning, let's actually use a pair of jeans, because we always know that jeans have a tendency to get little holes in them like so. On your white 9800, it's equipped with a free arm. To achieve the free arm, I'm going to remove the accessory tray. So let's just lift up slightly, and you can notice how easy it slides off, thus exposing our free arm. Let's tell our fabric guide that we're working on a heavyweight woven and that we want to darn, so touch stitch 39. Let's consult our help window, and we can see that it recommends to use the B foot at a pressure of 6. So let's change to the B foot. I'm going to go to my accessory tray, and there is my B foot. Let's take the A foot off, down and forward, and slide the B foot into place. Just make sure that you get all your threads. If you ever happen to snap your thread into place like I did, just snap your foot back off and on. Our pressure is on 6 and our tension is normal. We now slide our mending right over the free arm, and you'll notice with your automatic mending stitch, it's going to stitch down over the hole. When we reach the length, we touch the reverse. It will now go back and forth 12 times, filling this in and doing a wonderful mending job. The full piercing power of our white 9800 gives it the strength and durability to mend through even the thickest fabrics. In a case where you would have a large hole, like as you can see I have, all you would do is move the fabric over and resume doing the same stitch. But let's take a look at that mending stitch. Notice how it mended up the edge of that hole and weaved our stitches right back into place. Isn't mending easy? From mending, let's move on to another utility stitch. And that utility stitch is elastic application. For elastic application, I'm going to work with my 3-step zigzag, so let's touch stitch 5. I'm going to tell my fabric guide that I'm working with a lightweight stretch. At this point, let's consult the help window, and we can see that it indicates to use our A presser foot and a pressure of 4. So again, change back to the A foot and reduce your pressure to 4. When stitching on elastic in lingerie, you just want to make sure that the little lace edge is up. Place the fabric underneath the foot, and let's get ourselves lined up here, and begin stitching. I'll usually take 1 to 2 stitches and hold on to my threads in the back. At that point, I will stretch my elastic accordingly and resume stitching. Doesn't this 3-step zigzag do a wonderful job? And let me just re-grab a hold of everything and continue stitching. Of course, pinning while making a slip would make it much easier. But look what a great job it does, and it stitches that elastic right in place. From elastic application, another practical technique comes in when we work with knits. For example, I've got this little t-shirt that I've made, and you notice that it has a ribbing application. To put our ribbing in, let's tell our fabric guide that we're working on a medium weight stretch and that we want to do stitch 11. At this point, our fabric guide recommends that we use our B foot and a pressure of 2. So let's change to the B foot and place our pressure on 2. To make a mock neckline application, I'm going to take just a little piece of sweatshirt fleece, fold it in half, and now I've made my mock neckline. We then take our ribbing, place it on top and underneath the foot, and begin stitching. You'd stretch it around as you sew. The general rule of thumb states that you want your ribbing to be cut 2/3 the size of the neckline. So if our neckline was 21 inches around, we would want to cut our ribbing 14 inches, and that would give us perfect results. And you'll notice the great result it does. Isn't it wonderful? From ribbing, let's move into a really fun stitch that can join fabrics together. For example, on the bottom of my slip, I wanted to attach lace to it. And the easiest way to attach the lace was to use my bridging stitch. So let's tell our fabric guide we're working with a medium weight woven and that we want to use stitch 7. At this point, our help window recommends that we use our B foot, which we have on, and a pressure of 6. So let's return our pressure to 6. We're now ready to sew. I'm taking 2 edges of a medium weight fabric and I'm going to abut them together to turn it into one piece. We place them underneath the foot and begin stitching. When doing this, you could use an optional accessory called a raised seam guide that would allow us to have space in between the 2 fabrics, and that would be called faggoting. And it's explained in the back of your instructional manual. But take a look at that bridging. Wasn't that easy to join the 2 pieces of fabric together? From the bridging stitch, you can also do another technique called shearing. Again, this is explained in great detail in your optional owner's workbook. But see what a beautiful job it does of shearing up our fabric for us? So there are many applications you can do with the bridging stitch. But let's move on to a decorative technique called applique. For applique, you can create some great, wonderful designs. You can see here on this children's garment, we've appliqued little balloons in place. When working with applique, what you'll want to do first is, of course, cut your design out. And what I've done is I've glue-sticked my diamond in place. In regular sewing techniques, besides using glue stick, you can use Wonder Under, which will fuse them together wonderfully. One of the neat things about your new white 9800 is that it has a built-in applique stitch. So let's tell our fabric guide that we're working on a heavyweight woven and touch applique. Because applique is a decorative technique, we're going to want to reduce our tension. But you notice for almost all of our sewing applications today, we have kept our tension at 5.5. And you would always keep it there for regular sewing. But when doing specialty techniques like buttonholes or applique, when you want a great density, just reduce that down to approximately 3, and you'll get wonderful finish. As we take a look at our help window, we can see that it recommends the B foot. So we're going to use the B foot as you can see. When doing pivoting on applique, it's also very easy to use your needle stop down. So let's just touch for our needle down. This will make it great for pivoting. And now we begin to applique. At this point, I want to check one thing because I do believe we're out of bobbin thread. So I'm just going to remove this and we'll just clip that on the thread cutter. And sure enough, let's take our empty bobbin out, and since we already have a full bobbin, we'll place that back into our bobbin case. Remember, the concave side goes in, it comes through the opening, tension spring, and right onto our fabric. If we had already started our appliquing stitch, one of the neat things about your white 9800 is you could have actually you could have stopped, changed your bobbin thread, and continued stitching without ever dropping a stitch. When working with appliques, it's also great to use such rayon threads, such as sulky or something that will give you a high sheen. You notice that my needle stops in the down position. This makes it very easy for pivoting. And we can continue coming down the second side. I'm only going to do 2 sides, but if you were at home, of course, you'd continue all the way around your diamond. Let's touch stop to have it tie it off for us. With one tap of our foot control, we'll bring our needle to the up position. For the rest of the time, I'd like my needle to always stop up. So let's go back up to the panel and touch needle up. And now our needle will always stop in the up position. When doing applique, there's also an optional accessory available called an open toe applique foot. This makes visibility great when doing appliques. Again, consult your local white dealer for that optional accessory. Besides having regular appliques, we also have tapering appliques. Let's tell our fabric guide we're working on medium weight woven and touch stitch 40. And stitch 40 is an automatic auto taper. When we begin sewing, it's going to start and it tapered down into the main body. When we'd like it to come back down into a point, just touch the reverse arrow and it now automatically tapers down and knots it. If you didn't want your tapered applique to be quite this wide, you could touch your twin needle safety. And now you would have a 3 millimeter wide tapered stitch. Again, when you reach the length you want, just touch the reverse arrow and it'll taper right back down. When doing hearts and flowers, this tapering applique stitch sure does come in handy. But besides doing it for working on, let's say, flowers or hearts, you can even make your own tapered monograms. Aren't they beautiful? Moving on from the applique stitch, what I'd like to talk to you about now for a few moments is something called hem stitching. And hem stitching gives us the finished effect where it almost looks like hand. You can see that it gives us kind of a holing effect. To achieve this, you need to use a wing needle. Again, this is something you can purchase from your local white dealer. But what makes the wing needle so special is that it actually has a flanged side, and that's what gives us the holing effect. For your heirloom stitches, we recommend that you use a stitch 13, let me just get this out of the way. Use stitch 13 and 14 to give you the most professional finish. From hem stitching, let's move into some of your decorative stitches because there are so many beautiful stitches on your white 9800. For example, let's take a look at the front of my blouse. You can notice that we've got many different designs for you to choose from. You can work with like a rickrack, some of the nice flower and vine designs, even more satin-like techniques. Let's begin by sewing a heart. So let's tell our fabric guide we're working on medium weight woven and touch stitch 27. That now gives us a heart. And now consult your help window. The last thing we did was a twin needle tapered applique. So let's touch our twin needle to bring us back to a regular 6mm wide width. Because we're still doing a decorative technique, we're going to keep that tension reduced. And now we can sew a row of hearts. Let's stop after the third heart, so I'm just going to touch stop. And it's going to automatically tie that heart off. Wasn't that easy? You can also use your stop button as a one-time if you ever wanted to sew just one heart. This is especially fun when doing like baby quilts to tie them. When doing decorative stitches, there's certain times when you may have a lot of bulk, let's say like tying a baby quilt. And this is where the mirror image comes in handy. Let's go back up to our selection panel and touch mirror image. The mirror image symbol has now appeared in my help window. And as I sew one heart, you'll notice that it actually turns it right over and gives us a flip-flop effect. Wasn't that easy? Besides being able to do, let's say, like heart and single decorative stitches, our white 9800 is equipped with many beautiful satin edges. For example, on this little girl's jumper, we finished off the sleeves using a scallop stitch. I've used that same scallop stitch on the sleeve of my blouse. Let's run a row of decorative edges. So I'm going to touch stitch 31. This is our, this is kind of like a waving satin edge, and I think it's really kind of neat. Since the previous sample that we had sewn was a medium weight woven, my fabric guide remembered that's what I was sewing on. Now that we've sewn a little bit of this scallop, I'm going to go ahead and touch stop so it'll tie it off automatically. Isn't that a nice flowing scallop? Besides having scallop-type edges, for those of you who are into geometric shapes, we also have a wonderful triangular edge, and that's stitch 29. So let's just touch 29. Again, everything on our help window remains the same, so let's run our row of triangular edges. And again, at this point I'm going to touch stop so it automatically ties it off. And isn't that a wonderful satin border? From satin borders, let's move into programming, because your 9800 can hold up to 32 stitches in its memory. So for the first time, let's go up to our selection panel and touch the function button. Right now, it's taken us into the program mode. At this point, let's touch stitch 20. You'll notice that the 20 appeared in the help window, To advance my cursor so that I can add an additional stitch, I'm going to touch the memory arrow. You'll notice that the 20 has now disappeared. That means our 9800 is ready for our next stitch. Let's touch stitch 21. Again, to advance it, we need to go up to the memory arrow and touch. Let's add one more stitch 20 and enter it again. Now let's run a row of this stitching. Before I run that row, let's consult our help window, and I can see that we're working on medium weight woven, and it recommends the B foot. Oh, come back up to your help window for 1 minute. Do you notice that my program light is flashing at me? And that's because it's saying, Ruth, I'm in the program mode. This is where I accept all the stitches you want to enter in. Touch the function button one more time to place it in repeat. You notice that stitch 20 came up, and now it's ready to run my series of stitches. After our second series, I'm going to touch the stop button, and it'll stop automatically at the end of this series. And what a neat little vine design. Wasn't that easy? Besides being able to program in different decorative stitches, you're also able to program in 2 styles of alphabets. Let's take the time now to program in the word white 9800. I'm going to touch the function mode back to program. I'm now going to come up to the top selection and touch clear to clear out what was previously in my memory. At this point, I need to go to the menu mode and touch for the letter A. Do you see how I'm in my block writing mode? Let's continue now to the stitch number 24, which is a W. To enter it, we come up to the memory. We then go over to H, enter, I, enter, T, E, and now I'd like to have a space. Stitch 40 is your space, so then just touch 40, and you can't see it very well in your help window, but there is a slight little line that indicates your space. Enter it, and now touch for 9, 8. Your zeros are actually your O, so let's go up to stitch 15 and enter 1 and the second one. We've now programmed in the word white 9800. You'll notice that when I'm doing this decorative work, besides working with a medium weight woven fabric, I'm also always using a stabilizer. That stabilizer ensures that we get great stitching results. Make sure to use a stitch and tear. Again, to sew this feature, I need to touch the function mode into repeat. And now we're ready to sew white 9800. It's kind of fun to watch your stitches form. I never thought a sewing machine would ever be able to write. I only want to write white 9800 one time, so I'm going to touch the stop button. At any time during the sewing, you can touch stop. And if you'd like, you could actually program your stop in. And look at that. If you ever made an error, it's very easy to correct and check first before you sew. To do that, I'm going to touch my function button back into program. I'm now going over to my memory arrows, and by just touching them, we can see that we can advance through our memory. So let's say that I really only wanted to write the word white and not 9800. After the E, when I'm at the space, all I need to do is touch clear, and it'll automatically edit out the space and the 9800. For more information on editing, please refer back to your owner's manual or your optional owner's workbook. But let's sew that word white so you can see how easy that was. Again, besides having the script mode, besides having block writing, we also have script writing. And since I forgot to touch stop, we're going to write white, white, because white is always right. At this point, let's move on and use our script lettering. And what I'm going to do with the script lettering is I'm going to program in my initials for you. So again, let's come up to our selection panel, touch the function button until we're in program. At this point, come over and touch clear because we want to clear out the word white. I'm now going back to the menu and I'm touching it one more time, and you can see that we have a cursive A on the screen. That indicates that we're working with the script mode. So let's program in R, enter, A, enter, and N. You will notice in your help window that it's showing a regular block N. But we are in the cursive menu, so our white 9800 knows that it's going to sew cursive. At this point, I want to program in my stop. So all I'm going to do is touch stop. Again, I need to touch function into repeat. And you know, I think I just did something that you may find you may do at home. After I had touched the N, I began telling you about the block up on the screen, and I never advanced my cursor. By touching the stop, I programmed over the N. So all I have is an R and an A. Again, to edit that, but before I edit it, let me show you something about your script writing. You notice that in between the R and the A, it makes a basting stitch. You can easily just come right in and clip that basting stitch out, thus giving you beautiful results. To add an end on the end, we're not going to sew it, but let me show you how you'd go about that. We'll come back up to Program. I notice my R is in. Let's come over to our memory button, advance the cursor, the A. Oh, there's that stop. All we need to do is touch N, advance the cursor, and stop. And now I've programmed in all my initials. Wasn't that easy? At this point, we've taken you through all the wonderful capabilities on your white 9800. But with your own creativity, you can create many beautiful garments and things for your home and your entire family. The possibilities are endless. With the ease of operation, through the help of our fabric guide and our help window, it makes your sewing ever so easy. And remember, we at White Sewing are committed to offering you the most educational services we can to ensure that you use your white 9800 to the fullest. Thank you and happy sewing.